Have you ever gone back to watching your favorite childhood cartoons and think, is there any reason why most of these characters or locations are bizarre looking? Maybe more along the lines of, how exactly do those Pegasus make rainbows, or what exactly are Krabby Patties made of? Maybe even dark questions like, is the movie Up just a subtle way of showing kids what death is like? Every cartoon you could think of, either from Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney Junior, or as I knew it, Playhouse Disney, even PBS Kids, a lot of people have come up with dark and sometimes disturbing theories of what the world in those shows are like. Don't believe me? Well, allow me to show them to you then. Greetings, my horror enthusiasts out there. My name is Rojo, a demon wolf here to show you the disturbing truth about the childhood you remember. About the shows you watch, not whatever trauma you went through. I'm not that heartless, unfortunately. Ever since the beginning of 2023, nostalgia has pretty much hit everyone that's currently in their 20s. And yes, that includes me. I still have memories where I go back to watching my absolute favorite childhood cartoons. As a kid, I always glued myself to the TV whenever my favorite shows were on, and trust me, I had a lot of them. SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, and so many others from Nickelodeon, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Imaginary Friends, Adventure Time, and so many others for Cartoon Network, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Little Einsteins, Handy Manny, and others from Playhouse Disney that is now known as Disney Junior, Word Girl, Super Y, Curious George, and others from PBS Kids. Yeah, you get the point. I hate going outside. These cartoon shows did more than teach me basic things that made school super boring and learning how to be a good person towards everyone. But I got to see a great amount of different 2D and 3D animation styles made by so many different people. Of course, my most favorite episodes were when they did Halloween specials for kids to get excited for trick-or-treating. You know, the kind where the whole family would go around the neighborhood and get free candies from their neighbors and friends instead of just the trunks of random strangers' cars. You know, the whole trunk-or-treat thing? I still don't get how that's safer than just doing the normal trick-or-treating. Anyways, it's no surprise that these same cartoon shows would find their way amongst the horror community, some being part of the cliched lost episode creepypastas that I already covered. But the ones I want to talk about are the dark theories people have made that have raised eyebrows and made people think twice, seeing as some theories made some eerie connections to certain things that happened in the show. Just know that these theories are made up and have been debunked by the creators of the shows. Well, except for one. But either way, they do talk about topics that some of you guys may find too disturbing. So heed my warning from this point forward. Without further ado, here are some of my favorite dark theories. There are quite a few shows that people made about the theory of characters being dead and stuck in purgatory. The most well-known one is the one for Ed, Edd n Eddy. In the show, the theory suggests that each kid in the cul-de-sac neighborhood died in different time periods. All their souls are sent into this purgatory realm that shows a neighborhood that's in eternal summer with no adults. They would also live as their childhood selves and would live through whatever personalities they had to deal with, which is why it shows they never age as time goes on. Rolf died in 1903 after being trampled by a bull that got out of its cage, and he still performs his farmer duties taking care of the animals. Johnny 2x4 lived without friends, and his only companion was a piece of wood that he drew a face on and named it Plank. He would later die of tuberculosis in 1922 and took his only friend along with him into the purgatory afterlife. Eddy grew up during the Great Depression of the 1930s in New York, scamming kids left and right, until an angry group chased Eddy to a lake and he would end up drowning. Maybe he could have used the money for swimming lessons. Even after being brought to the afterlife, Eddy continues to find ways to make a quick buck, scamming kids in the neighborhood despite money no longer being necessary. Ed and Sarah are actually brother and sister, whose father died fighting in World War II, and their mother became distant from them. To compensate, Sarah became the boss in the house, to be like their mother, while Ed delved into the fantasy world of comic books and monster movies. They later died in a car accident in 1953. Naz was described as a flirtatious young girl during the 60s and 70s, trying to get anything she wanted by the boys in the neighborhood. In 1979, a serial killer broke out of an asylum and would later break into the house and murder Naz and her family. Naz was traumatized by what happened to her and shut the world out when she entered purgatory. Ed, also known as Double D, grew up with parents in the 1980s who pushed him into academic success and to be perfectly clean and neat. It's believed that in 1986, while working on his chemistry set, he would later die from a gas leak explosion. Kevin, who was born a day after Double D's death, had to deal with an abusive father who fatally beat him in the drunken rage in 1999. Sadly, he would die due to the injuries sustained, and yet, as he joined the afterlife, he still saw his father as a loving figure, yet still holding that bullying personality that was caused by what his father had done to him. Lastly, Jimmy was said to be the last kid to enter purgatory, who unfortunately has leukemia. He wasn't able to have friends since his parents believed he was too frail to be around the other kids. He later died in the 2000s after being bedridden due to his illness. This left the Cankers that also showed up in the neighborhood, but these kids were different. Some people say that they were killed in a murder-suicide in the 1970s, however most people believe they are actually demons that come to torment the souls of the now completed purgatory. It would explain why the Cankers had normal-looking colored tongues, while the other kids had their tongue colored in a bluish, grayish, almost sickly color, like a corpse. The creators obviously debunked this theory as they showed the kids with their parents all happy and alive. That didn't stop this theory being used a lot, most notably happening in My Little Pony as well, where the main 6 were actually the souls of 6 different girls that died and became ponies in the afterlife. And yes, it was a creepypasta, but it was still a theory nonetheless. In the fall of 1989, Jim Davis, creator of the comic strip story Garfield, made a Halloween special where Garfield wakes up in an abandoned house. He finds that he's in the house alone, looking like it hadn't been taken care of for years. After seeing an illusion of John and Odie, Garfield starts losing his mind, yelling to himself that he doesn't want to be alone. He then quote-unquote wakes up from his imagination, with John asking him if he wants breakfast. Jim's message was to show how powerful one's imagination can be and how terrifying it has on our mental state. But according to certain Garfield fans, a dark theory popped into their heads. The theory states that the abandoned house Garfield sees is the real world. His owner abandoned him and the house for a long time, and Garfield is completely starving to death. In his hunger dreams, he always sees John making his famous lasagna, and Garfield always wanting more of it. This would be the last thing he lives through in his head before death inevitably takes over. While Jim Davis obviously denied the theory, his plans did work as it focused on the fear of being alone or abandoned, which is what he intended for the comic strip. This is why people that have pets always take them everywhere they go and make sure they are well fed. If for some reason you neglect your pets, maybe you shouldn't have them to begin with. Ever wondered why the Rugrats babies were able to talk to Angelica? Well, that's because she imagined them to keep her company. The theory, however, shows a darker side to it. The babies in the show actually don't exist. Tommy was a stillborn, which is why Stu constantly makes toys in the basement for his child that didn't have a chance to live. Chucky died from the same health condition as his mother, which is why Chaz is a nervous wreck all the time. And the Devilles had an abortion. So since Angelica didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, she imagined them as twins. One as a boy and the other as a girl. This would explain why to Angelica, she hears them talking normally while the parents don't hear them talk at all. As for her parents, her mother Charlotte wasn't actually her mother. Her real mother Cynthia died from a heroin overdose, and the doll that Angelica is fixated on is theorized to show that image of her real mother, which explains why the hair is all messed up and the orange shirt is unwashed. Drew, who must have been depressed after the death of his wife, ended up marrying a woman named Charlotte, who was a gold digger, and Angelica fooled herself into thinking Charlotte is her actual mother, idolizing her and imagining her as a very successful businesswoman. The only Rugrat that was real was what would have been Tommy's brother, Dill. Unlike the other kids that Angelica imagined as talking ones, she can't hear Dill talk, only screaming and crying. Not knowing the difference of what's real, Angelica hits Dill, which causes him to have a brain hemorrhage that caused a somewhat physical deformation. This all continues to All Grown Up, where Angelica starts taking acid to continue living in her imagination where the Rugrats are all grown up, including the outcast Dill due to his deformation, which got other kids to ridicule him for his weirdness. Susie was the only real friend Angelica had who supported her by playing along with her imagination. Unfortunately, Angelica would die at age 13 due to the drug overdose, causing Susie to help arrange Angelica's funeral. Susie would later grow up as a psychologist and would team up with Nickelodeon to make the show. Obviously, this theory got popular enough to be its own creepypasta story, and there was a bit more explained about everyone else, including Chaz and Kira being happily married despite Kira's addiction to coke for some reason. It's quite an interesting theory to read up on. Little too much death happening towards children, but it got me to notice how Angelica is able to talk to the babies. Since we're on the topic of mental sadness happening to kids, let's hear about Timmy Turner. As we see in the show, Timmy has to deal with a violent babysitter, Vicky, oblivious parents, and a crazed teacher that constantly fails him. But when he gets home, he has Cosmo and Wanda as his fairy godparents that would grant him any wish he desires. Magic stuff happens, negative consequences follow suit, then he wishes things to be back to normal. Now why is that? Well, we got a theory that shows a more depressing side to Timmy's life. There were a lot of things happening to Timmy that made him depressed and miserable. Parents that constantly neglects and abandons him, Vicky, the babysitter, constantly tormenting and even physically abusing him, and dealing with Mr. Crocker, who apparently took Timmy's misery to make advances towards him. I'm just gonna leave it at that. So basically, when Crocker goes crazy about capturing his fairies, he means robbing Timmy's joy, hope, innocence, and a chance of having a good, positive future. Speaking of the fairies, Cosmo and Wanda weren't actually fairies, they were actually antidepressants. Since he is still a young kid, taking these medications allows him to live in his imaginary world where he can wish for anything he wants. And yes, that includes having Cosmo and Wanda as fairies. It would explain why at the end, everything goes back to normal. That would be the medication wearing off. It would also explain why Timmy wouldn't remember having his fairies when he gets older, because hopefully in the future, he wouldn't need his medications anymore. It's pretty dark thinking about what a 10-year-old boy actually goes through. While the creators didn't really say anything about the theory, it would be an eye-opener to people around the world that there are kids out there going through all of that torment and abuse. If you happen to be one of them, just know there are people out there that can help out. You won't really need fairies to wish you out of there. Ah yes, Winnie the Pooh, a well-known storybook turning into one of Disney's most well-known animation movies, got us quickly thinking why these characters are acting the way they are. Mental illnesses. Winnie the Pooh has an eating disorder, as shown why he constantly eats honey. Piglet has anxiety, as he shows him as a nervous wreck, constantly worrying about what's happening around him. Eeyore suffers from depression, unable to feel joy in his heart, even when he has positive things going on for him and his friends. Rabbit has OCD, constantly needing to organize everything in his garden and inside his home. Owl has dyslexia, where he mistakes certain words as something else, but would never admit he has it due to also having a narcissistic personality, believing he is wiser than everyone else. Oh, so that's why he's an owl. Tigger has ADHD, needing to be everywhere, never slowing down or standing still, which explains why he bounces around and always wants to do something. Apparently he also has some kind of bipolar disorder, as his moods constantly change as well. Kanga has social anxiety, being overprotective of her son Rue, who apparently falls under the autism spectrum, lacking awareness of any dangers and always staying in his mother's pouch. And finally, you have Christopher Robin himself, who suffers from schizophrenia, imagining the characters coming to life depending on his mood. Never in my life would I end up being relatable to one of these characters. I guess that explains why I love the movie so much. Ah yes, Courage the Cowardly Dog, the one kids show that introduced many of us into the world of horror while still showing us some funny moments to keep us from being too scared. But why are there monsters constantly appearing, and what happened to the area, simply known as Middle of Nowhere, around Muriel and Eustace? Well, I got two of them that I find interesting. One theory suggests that we're only seeing the world through the perspective of Courage. Since Muriel and Eustace are old seniors, they don't have enough physical strength to take Courage on walks outside of the house. So the way he sees it, the outside world is a barren wasteland when really it's just any normal suburb neighborhood. The monsters that are in the show that Courage freaks out over are actually just neighbors that stop by for a visit. He only freaks out about what they look like because he never met them before. Dogs happen to have a hyperactive imagination since they can see things we can't see. It would explain why Muriel and Eustace don't remember what happened while Courage does all he can to protect the both of them. Another theory suggests a more mythological sense. Some people believe that nowhere is actually hell, more specifically the Greek version of the underworld. Eustace is Hades, who rules over everything he hates, Muriel represents all of humanity, and Courage is simply Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the gates to the underworld to keep any evil from escaping into the living. Each monster they come across represents all types of evil that the Greeks believed in: violence, greed, hate, murder, and many others. Courage's duty is to protect Muriel and Eustace's house from the monsters that attempt to take over the place, which is a kid-friendly way to show the duty Cerberus has to do on a daily basis. You see why I'm in love with mythological tales? You guys are familiar with the 7 deadly sins, right? No, not the anime characters, but the biblical ones. Well, what if I were to tell you that certain characters from SpongeBob SquarePants represents those sins? Sandy represents pride, as she constantly brags about her home country, Texas, her athletic abilities in all sports and combat, as well as her academic achievements in all things science related. Reminds me of some other character that brags about their intellect. Mr. Krabs obviously represents greed, as it shows his obsession with money, always wanting to make a quick buck and not wanting to spend a single dime. Pearl represents lust, as she shows her obsessive desires to be with every boyfish star in Bikini Bottom. Plankton represents envy, as shown from his jealous actions towards his rival's achievement, the Krusty Krab getting more success, and the Chum Bucket becoming more of a forgotten thing people just pass by every day. That explains why his life goal is to get the secret formula of the Krabby Patty. But wouldn't he be surprised when he finds out what they're made of? Mrs. Puff represents gluttony, as we see her overindulge herself with food. But can you blame her? After dealing with a certain sponge constantly being in boating school, I'd do the same thing to help me forget. Squidward represents wrath, as he is seen just as the most miserable character and being negative towards everyone he finds annoying, including his neighbors and his job. And finally, Patrick represents sloth, as seen how lazy he gets and how slow in the brain he is. A lot of people have actually debated which character best represents which sin. Some people say that Patrick would be gluttony, as he indulges in food as well, and Squidward could also be envy due to how successful Squilliam is. Some even say SpongeBob represents lust, but most people confirm he actually represents positivity and optimism. Another theory suggests that Bikini Bottom takes place under the island known as Bikini Atoll. The island was used by the US military in 1946 for nuclear testing to stay ahead of the upcoming arms race against the USSR. One bomb, known as Baker, detonated 27 meters underwater, which caused SpongeBob and his friends to become bizarre looking due to the results of the nuclear tests. If that's the case, I'm surprised any of the fish are still alive. There will be a lot of floating bodies all over the town. Well, while we're on the topic of what will be the end of society when World War III occurs, let's talk about what really happened to the Jetsons and Flintstones. For those that don't know about the two shows, they were what were defined as Saturday morning cartoons back in the 60s and 70s. The Flintstones took place in the prehistoric days with cavemen and enormous dinosaur-like animals, while the Jetsons took place far into the future of the 21st century. You know, the typical vision everyone had of what the 2000s millennium would be like. Boy, how disappointed our parents ended up feeling. Instead of moving sidewalks, flying cars, and conveyor belts to simulate walking around the neighborhood, we instead had protests, riots, and teetering into a nuclear apocalypse. Speaking of that, here's what this theory suggested. At first, we believed everything that happens with the Flintstones is all before things happen with the Jetsons. But this theory suggests it's the other way around. The Jetsons lived their way in the high-class futuristic luxury life, then the bombs start raining down, making society turn to rubble, and survivors end up going back to living like cavemen in the Stone Age. This could mean that while Elroy believed his time machine malfunctioned and brought his family to the past, what if it actually brought him to the future of the 25th century at a time after the nukes went off? Seems like when people say our future looks bright, they mean the bright lights of destruction. It could explain why, despite the fact they are supposedly cavemen, they use modern-looking tools and act like modern society, even celebrating the Christmas holiday, even though it supposedly takes place during the Stone Age, way before Jesus was even born. Makes you think about what our future will end up being like. Finally, here's one more that I happen to think about all the time. This theory I saved the best for last because, unlike the others that were mentioned earlier, the creators of Adventure Time actually confirmed something that gave us a good clue of what happened to Earth. It was known as the Great Mushroom War. Happening roughly 1,000 years ago, human civilization was just like ours, but the world was also looked at by the four elements: fire, ice, candy, and slime. They foresaw a Lich attempting to destroy the world. A huge conflict erupted, nation against nations, tribes against tribes. This leads to the Mushroom War, named after the mushroom cloud that's shown after a nuclear missile erupts. The destruction was so big, a chunk of the planet got blown away, and humanity almost went extinct. Certain tribes and communities were lucky enough to survive the conflict, including Simon, who was the Ice King, and Marceline before she became Vampire Queen. But the damage has reversed society close to its primitive state. But it didn't deter humanity from pushing through their obstacles. The aftermath of the conflict also brought in new races that caused their own conflict with humanity, but communities managed to coexist with them in the end. There were many scenes that gave us hints and clues about what happened. Missiles shown in the opening theme, modern technology shown in abandoned areas, skeletons of soldiers littering the ground. Clearly this was one hell of a conflict. This could explain why we got zombies in the first episode of Adventure Time, and why we barely see humanity in the land of Ooh. Either that or every adventure Finn and Jake went through was all in Finn's head, as his body lay on the hospital bed in a comatose state with his normal dog Jake laying by his side. Honestly, that's a much better ending instead of world-ending conflicts. We already got enough of that going on already. Well, that was a lot of dark, depressing, honestly terrifying theories that a lot of people have thought of. But hey, that's the beauty of guessing what goes on in our little fantasy world we put ourselves in. Much of these theories are always based on real-life events that happen in different people's lives. Animators and artists always portray the physical and mental struggles that they live with, while also fearing about the future we possibly might get. But in the end, we really had nothing to fear as a community. We always have people that not only feel the same way, but will also be there for those that need help. Yeah, the real world looks like everyone wants to fight and kill each other, but there are positive people out there that honestly just want to make people smile and laugh. I would know. All of them are simply fun theories of what we believe is happening, even if the creators debunk them for being outrageously silly. Plus, these are just animated shows we loved watching as kids, so there really is no point in taking what people say too seriously. Still, I hope it made you guys think with all these theories that were mentioned. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know I'm taking forever to get these videos out, but trust me, I'm doing everything I can to get these made. You can make your theories about what's happening to me in the meantime. As always, leave a like and comment any theories you thought of on your favorite shows. Subscribe for more content like this, and hit the bell icon to know when I upload a new video. Until then, keep your fears and anxiety levels high. I'll see you very soon.